body or mind. Make yourself comfortable, and as you ease into stillness, just allow your breathing to draw out a little longer, particularly on the exhale. Focus your attention as much as you can on your breathing. Let the slow, steady rhythm of the airflow become a mindful and soothing experience. When I speak to you here prior to each story, I try to say the things that I know I would want to hear if I were falling asleep to this show. I found the process of getting to sleep rather difficult throughout much of my life. I still have bad patches nowadays, but I've gradually learned to remain calm and not let it stress me out on those difficult nights. Yes, it can make the next day a fair bit more challenging, but getting worked up about it only brings more wakefulness. So remember, while you listen along tonight, you can use your breath to help pacify any stress, tension, or worry. It's a simple yet effective way to calm the nervous system and guide you into a beautiful night's sleep. And that's especially true when you combine those deep breaths with a dreamy bedtime story. Like this one, it's a tale as old as time. So without further ado, drift into the fairy tale world of Beauty and the Beast. There was once a merchant named Lorne who staked his entire fortune on a fleet of ships, but lost them all at sea. Being a widower, he didn't have to take this news home to a wife. However, he had 6 children who had grown used to a life of relative privilege. When the debts were called in and rumors spread that the family was penniless, most of them took the news hard. As days turned into weeks and the ships didn't appear in the port, the merchant had to begin selling their fine furniture, their carriage, and even his daughter's jewelry and expensive dresses. They had to give up their richly appointed house and move to a cottage on the outskirts of town. Lorne was frequently away visiting business acquaintances and trying to find partners who might invest and help him rebuild his business. While he traveled, his children, 3 boys and 3 girls, were left to keep the house on their own. Although they were practically adults, the 3 boys and the 2 oldest girls were largely useless when it came to practical skills. They had become quite accustomed to a life of study and idle luxury. The youngest daughter, whose name was Camille, was the most willing to take on the necessary household chores now that they were without servants. Perhaps it was her more impressionable age, or perhaps it was that she had a sweeter or steadfast temperament. Whatever the combination of factors, Camille did the best she could to learn the basics of running a household. Lorne's brood did not have many friends in the village. To make their situation worse, the 5 oldest children also made no effort to adjust to their new lives. They did nothing to prove themselves capable or to endear themselves to the neighbors who might have helped them. Camille, however, sought advice from the villagers about unfamiliar skills such as baking, sewing, gardening, and keeping chickens. Their wariness turned to genuine affection when they grew to appreciate her willingness to learn and to work hard. In this way, over time, she became the glue that held Lorne's household together. The 5 older siblings struggled to accept their fate, unable to change. Camille ensured that they had a tidy home and that there was food on the table. One day, when the family had been living this way for nearly 2 years, Lorne received word that one of his lost ships had appeared in the port. its cargo largely intact. The family rejoiced at this miraculous news, the older 5 siblings declaring that their lives among the villagers were finally at an end. Camille took pleasure in their happiness, but the news did not seem as important to her as it did to the others. Had come to love their small cottage with its tidy garden and comforting aroma of baking bread. Although it would be a relief to see the rest of her family content, she was unsure whether she wanted to return to their former lives of idleness. She had become a person who liked being useful. Died in order to reclaim his property. Lauren had to travel to the port by horseback, a journey of a couple of days. Once there, he could arrange for the proper dispersal of his reclaimed wealth and hire a comfortable coach to bring him home. In anticipation of their improved fortunes, he asked each of his children what gift they would like to have from the city. The older siblings demanded finery, silk shoes with sparkling buckles, hats with elaborate trimmings, velvet capes, and jewels. Only Camille was silent, seeming to think very hard about what her request would be when her father turned to her and told her to speak up. She hesitated briefly. In truth, Father, I have always dreamed of seeing a rose, she said. They do not grow in this part of the country, and they are so exotic and expensive. If you could bring me a single rose in any color, that would be lovely. He chuckled at the strange whims of his youngest, but readily agreed. Privately, he thought he would also bring her a necklace or some sort of bauble to go with the flower. The weather was fine on the morning of his departure. Camille took care to pack his saddlebag with provisions for his journey and wished him farewell. With a somewhat tearful smile, the others were more cavalier. They were used to their father's travels and cared only for the gifts they could now expect upon his return. As he rode away down the sun-dappled forest path, Camille alone waited in front of the cottage until he disappeared. Had a strange feeling of misgiving, but didn't want to speak up. After all, their fortunes had obviously taken a turn for the better. While Lauren's children waited at the cottage, stiffly made his way to the port city, filled with anticipation of reclaiming his wealth and status. It was true, of course, that he had still suffered heavy losses. However, with the cargo in this ship, he could see the new business, perhaps building up to a new fleet of ships. His head was filled with dreams of the spices, silks, and other goods he might import in the future. It was devastating to him, therefore, to arrive and find his dreams dashed. It was true the ship had reappeared with most of its cargo unharmed. However, word had spread quickly of his good fortune, and his many creditors had taken swift action. By the time Lauren had come to claim his property, it had already been distributed to pay his many debts. In vain, he contacted one merchant after another, asking for an extension on his considerable bills, but it was no use. At the end of the day, he was a man without debts, but he was empty-handed. There was no money left for him to invest, and there was certainly no money to spend on the gifts promised to his family. He was so disheartened he didn't even want to stay in the city overnight without properly provisioning himself, considering the weather, or sending any correspondence ahead of him. Lauren mounted his tired horse again and rode out of town, heading back down the provincial road that had brought him to the hours outside of the city when darkness fell and a storm descended. Lightning and thunder crashed all around him, and the wind gusted mercilessly, blowing limbs off the trees. Lauren's horse became frightened and bolted away from the main road, taking him into an unfamiliar forest. Realizing too late that he had been foolish to undertake this nighttime journey, Lauren searched in the gusting wind for any sort of shelter, such as a cave. How long his horse wandered through the howling gale, he did not know. Finally, he saw a tall stone wall rise before him. He urged the horse onward, hoping he had reached a house where he might shelter. Arriving at the forbidding wall of rock, he saw that it was not a house, but the wall around an estate. A tall and imposing iron gate stood ever so slightly open. Having no time for good manners, Lauren dismounted and pushed the heavy swinging gate wider to pull his horse through. Together, they slowly headed up a paved walkway that receded ahead of them into the swirling darkness, with leaves flying all around and rain pelting him from all sides. Lauren could barely see the massive structure that emerged ahead of him in the wicked gloom. It was a mansion to be sure, though his visibility was limited. He could see it had a grand approach and many large rooms with tall windows. It was a very intimidating place for a person to arrive, uninvited, but he had no choice. He feared he could not survive the night without a roof over his head. Tying his horse up safely in a sheltered alcove, he walked to the massive front door and lifted the iron door knocker. He let it fall, hearing the sound echo through the gloom as if in response to the thunder. When there was no answer, he took a deep breath and pushed the door inward with all his weight. It gave, and he found himself almost falling onto the floor. The grand entryway, Lauren lay on the cold flagstones for a moment, regaining his breath in the eerie stillness. He could still hear the rain lashing the front steps through the crack in the tall door, and thought to himself how glad he was that he'd found shelter for his horse. Rising in the semi-darkness, he looked about him. He was in a grand reception area with a curved staircase ascending on either side. Suits of armor stood sentinel here and there ahead of him. There was a set of richly carved double doors. The silence inside the house was profound. One could have heard a pin drop, but there was a light glowing around the cracks of the doors in front of him. After a few half-hearted efforts to call out to the occupants, he took another deep breath and walked toward the lighted room. Pushing the door slowly open, he landed inside and scanned the room. The fire was roaring in the cavernous hearth. In front of it, a table was set for one, with a few simple dishes, a carafe, and a large drinking glass spread across it. His gaze took in the other aspects of the comfortable room. He saw upholstered chairs and tables carelessly stacked with books. Still, there was no sign of the owner. Lauren awkwardly sat down on one of the armchairs and waited for a few moments. Soon, he could not take his eyes from the dinner laid upon the table. The loaf of bread and the aroma of the roasted meat tormented him, and his stomach growled loudly. As minutes passed and nobody appeared, he soon gave into his hunger, seated himself at the table, first taking just a slice of bread and then slowly eating the entire meal. He passed an hour in contented silence, Perhaps he thought the owner was away from home and sheltering from the storm elsewhere, taking a deep drink of the delicious liquid in the glass. He hungrily polished off the rest of the dinner. Yes, he told himself the owner was away and he would be able to explain himself in the morning upon finishing all the food. Lauren leaned happily back in his chair and drank the rest of the contents of the carafe. The fire danced before his eyes, crackling and popping with a comforting warmth. Draining the last drop from his large cup, he pulled the letter about his recovered cargo ship from his pocket. Just a short time ago, he had been so full of hope. Now, those dreams were gone again. He dropped the letter on the table and pushed it away without even realizing it. Lauren fell into a deep sleep. He slumbered through the night without dreaming. When he awoke in the morning, it took him a moment to remember where he was. The fire had long ago burned down, and the plates and glasses he used the night before were still on the table. It appeared that his host had not yet returned home. Feeling sheepish that he'd entered a stranger's home without invitation, his embarrassment got the better of him rather than wait for the return of the owner. Lauren resolved to slip out of the house as quietly as possible and be quickly on his way. All, he told himself, the dinner would obviously have gone to waste anyhow. Raising himself from the upholstered chair, Lauren moved across the chamber and pulled the double doors open. Light filtered weakly into the entryway, meeting the austere hallway so that he could see it much better than the night before. Stepping self-consciously into the foyer, he found himself tiptoeing between the vigilant suits of armor as if they might come to life any moment and bar his path. Peering around him at the twin curving staircases, he noted that their carpet runners appeared neglected and dusty. It was as if nobody had been living here for some time. He walked lightly across the flagstones to the enormous front door. He reached for the handles and pulled with all his might. It slowly slid open again, revealing a misty courtyard outside. Squeezing himself through the crack and then pushing it shut behind him, he straightened his waistcoat and attempted to muster some dignity. Escaping his forbidding refuge like a thief in the night felt wrong, but he would try to put this entire humiliating journey behind him. Making haste, he returned to the alcove where he'd left his horse tethered the night before. He was glad to find her well. He reached into his saddlebag to feed her an apple he had left over from the supplies Camille had packed for him. Then, untying the horse, he quietly led her down the stone path he had traveled in the whipping wind the night. Before not looking behind him, he saw the mansion rising darkly into the growing daylight. It was an enormous chateau, long, beige, and rectangular. The building had a main center section and was flanked by identical wings on either side. The windows were tall and narrow, lining all the two large floors with a regimented appearance. They seemed to be staring down at him. The sloping tiled roof was thickly populated with chimneys. Turning away from the sight of the imposing shadow, he led the horse toward the front gate, taking in the overgrown gardens on either side of him. As he was nearing the end of the walkway, he spotted a particularly charming pergola that was overrun with rose bushes. Standing in the center of a round seating area was a rose bush blooming with most stunning pink roses he'd ever seen. All at once, he remembered his promise to Camille. Resolving to keep his word to his youngest daughter, he eagerly set to cutting blossoming roses from the bush with a knife he kept in his bag. One rose would not be enough to make up for the circumstances of his reappearance. He would take them all. The plant was so absorbed by his task that he didn't hear footsteps approaching. However, as he backed away from the rose bush, now devoid of all its blossoms, he sensed he was being watched. Turning, he saw a tall, fierce-looking man glowering down at him, or at least he thought it was a man. The being who stood before him resembled a human, but he was bristling from beneath the wilderness of facial hair, and he had an abnormally tall and muscular build. Obviously not prepared for company, he was wearing a wrinkled linen shirt and breeches. As if he had stormed over in a hurry, he appeared to be furious. "What do you think you are doing?" he said in a loud growl like that of a wolf. Lauren froze, painfully aware of the bouquet hanging from his left hand. He stuttered out an explanation, saying that he thought nobody lived here. He said he assumed the roses would not be missed. Then, seeing no change in the man's fearsome countenance, he finished weakly with the explanation that he had promised some roses to his daughter. The beastly man in the linen shirt waited in stony silence, as if considering his next words carefully, when he drew himself up to his full height and said, "You took advantage of my hospitality without asking. You ate my dinner. You slept in my chair. All of this I was willing to overlook without confronting you. However, you have now taken every bloom from my most prized rose bush. It has great personal meaning to me. There is not another like it, and each of those flowers is priceless in my estimation. I demand that you make an effort to compensate me for this." Hearing these words, Lauren felt his heart sinking. He shook his head in defeat and told the man that he could not pay anything at all. He had nothing to offer. The stony-faced host regarded him coolly. "In that case, you must work off your debt," he responded. "I am in need of laborers here at my estate." Lauren gawked at him, trying to formulate another suggestion. "But, sir," he protested, "I have 6 children at home. I cannot stay here with you. What will become of them?" The man appeared unmoved. "Either you work off your debt, or someone in your family must take your place," he said. "Take your roses, they are no good to me now. Return to your family and make your arrangements. I will expect you or your replacement to be here within a week. If you do not appear, I will fine you." With that, the glaring, fierce-looking man turned on his heel and strode toward the house, never looking back. Lauren watched him disappear into the shadow. Lauren could see no other option but to go home and tell his children what he had done. He did not know how, but he would have to make arrangements for them to manage in his absence. Perhaps when the man had calmed his temper, he would see sense and not keep Lauren in his service too long. But the storm passed and daylight on his side. Lauren was able to follow his path back to the main road and continue onward toward home. He rode steadily but slowly as he considered the news he'd have to share upon his arrival. It was a beautiful day. The mist lifted, and the early autumn sun showered him with a cheer that felt out of place. The birds heart sang sweetly, as if nothing was amiss, but his heart was heavy and he was hesitant about what was to come. He arrived home late that night. His children greeted him with excitement. After all, they were expecting gifts. Opening and closing his saddlebags, they playfully reached around to find the finery he had promised them. With regret, he instead offered each of them a rose. Camille took hers and smelled it with delight, admiring its perfection. But his other 5 children demanded to see their real presents. That night, round the crowded kitchen table, Lauren told his children what had happened on his ill-fated journey to the port city. He related the loss of his remaining fortune as well as the circumstances leading up to his current obligation to the owner of the mysterious shadow. When he concluded that he would have to return and work off his debt, the 5 oldest siblings were not pleased. They pouted, asking how they were supposed to manage in his absence.